Good morning, everyone. Welcome to yet another amazing episode of JIVINITI, Connecting the Dots, where we connect the dots between all matters of public and planetary health. Today, we have an amazing, fascinating activist, animal rights activist, all the way from Lebanon. However, he is in Bali, Indonesia, beautiful Bali, Indonesia, right now. Um, Seb Alex, we can't wait to talk to you. You're amazing, the work that you do, and we will catch you in under 10 seconds. Welcome, Seb. Thank you for
Hello.
agreeing to do this interview with us.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. So tell us where you are right now. I thought you were in Lebanon.
Yes. I am from Lebanon, born and raised. I've lived in several countries, and a few years ago, I came to Indonesia to take a break from activism. And I was based in Europe at the time, and I just didn't find any reason to go back to Europe. So I decided to stay in Indonesia. I've made my base here now, so I make all my online content here in this office, my YouTube, my podcast, everything. Whenever I have to do any lectures and stuff, I try to do as many as I can all at once. So I do a small tour in Europe, do the lectures, and then come back, organize the next set of lectures, which is what I'm doing now, and get back to activism. And of course, I spend some time in between in Lebanon as well to see my family.
All right. Okay. So it sounds as though you've got a base for activism. You've got a base for where
Yes.
your family is, and you spend your personal, time also with them. And you've got a base for producing your
Hmm.
online content. So,
Yes.
w- what is the reason for you to sort of pick and choose from, different locations on Mother Earth? What is the end
Um,
that you get from
yeah,
different?
that's interesting. So basically, well, in Lebanon, I also do activism because I help out with the projects of Lebanese vegans. So that's also there when I go see my family. I also spend time with the group and try to brainstorm on the next projects we can work on. The reason why I do the lectures and everything in Europe is because it's very easy to do it there. It's very easy to be invited to universities and schools. The language barrier is not there, cultural barrier is not there. And at the same time, living in Europe is very expensive and also not that nice compared to living in Indonesia. So I definitely, when I first came to Indonesia and just Southeast Asia in general, I was really shocked that I wasn't exposed to this culture before because I found it so welcoming and warm, which is something that I had in Lebanon, but I didn't have in Europe. And I didn't realize how much I missed it. The ability to even be here, being Lebanese, it's like the passport issue, the visas, and all that stuff. And then finally, one thing that matters a lot for me is the amount of racism that I used to face in Europe, weekly, if not on a daily basis, is something that I haven't faced a single time since I moved here 3 years ago. So it's an easy pick for me.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting that you mentioned the difference in energy and
Yeah,
vibration of certain places in Southeast Asia, and having been several times to Bali myself, I can vouch for how welcoming, how warm, how
yeah,
hospitable that place is within the larger country of Indonesia. Bali's got something special going on. So.
definitely.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself as an activist,
Okay,
and, about your childhood and how did you
sure.
become?
Um, well, I went vegan 8 years ago, and it's not something I thought about straight away. Even though on the first day that I went vegan, I watched a lot of documentaries that were supposed to push me towards the path of activism, but for some reason I didn't think about it. It wasn't until a year later that I saw a photo on Facebook of activists in London in the metro showing footage of the documentary Earthlings and giving out leaflets and talking to people. I went on a Facebook group in Barcelona and I wrote a post and I asked if there's anyone interested in doing that, and I found out that people were already doing that in Barcelona. I wasn't aware of it, so I joined them, and that's how my activism started. But I have been active in human rights issues as well before that. This is just something that made me realize, wow, like, yeah, I'm vegan, it's great, but it's not enough. It's not enough for the animals for me to just stop paying for their exploitation and death. I have to do more. It's a responsibility almost, I would say. And later I started organizing events myself, and I did that for a few years. After that, I saw the impact of activism, and my career was in architecture. So I was the head of architecture projects, the international projects of an architecture and engineering company in Barcelona. So I quit my job, decided to give all my time to activism and start a support page. If I get enough support, I thought I'll continue. Great. If not, that's also fine. I know I tried. Worst case scenario, I can just get another job and continue my life without wondering how it would have been like if I did that. So thankfully, I got the support that I needed to do that, and I've been doing that ever since full time. It's gonna be 4 or 5 years, and after I took the break from activism, which was around a month and a half or 2 months, well, it was a break from physical activism, I would say, because I did still make online content. I did enter slaughterhouse kill floor in different places to document what's happening to animals. So it was just a break from physical activism. After that, I received some invitations to do lectures in schools and universities, and I thought, well, this is something I haven't given a try. So I was really interested to see what it would be like. And the results were absolutely amazing because I prepared an anonymous survey for schools to give out to their students after I finish. And the impact of the lectures was so much more than what I was able to do 4 hours on the street trying to talk to people. 1 hour in a school or university is just so much more. It's like the best way I could spend my time. And it's also talking to the next generation who hopefully has more power in a few years, and it's also their future. And it relies on what they're going to decide to do. So I think it's a really good age range to target. And after that, I thought, well, I've done 35 or 40 lectures, and the results speak for themselves. Let me do this more. In 2020, I was supposed to do 80 lectures. I managed to do 10 or 11, and then the pandemic started. So I had to stop all the lectures. Obviously, everything got postponed and canceled. And that's when I realized, okay, now I have to switch back to online content because, during the pandemic, it was impossible to do anything physically. And that's when I started concentrating more on making YouTube videos, and recently also started a podcast called Principles of Change, where I invite different people, game changers, activists, to talk about what they do to normalize different types of activism, because I realize a lot of people think there's one perfect way of doing activism, but I don't think that's true. I think there's so many different ways that people can be active depending on what their talents are, and I want to encourage people to find what is their best thing that they can offer to the movement. And another thing that I did during that time was publish an ebook, When Animal Rights and Logic Meet. It's an ebook that explains logical fallacies and how it shapes our relation to other animals. It's available in 20 languages, and obviously it's for free. It's up on my website. Anyone can download it, and hopefully it'll help them have easier and better conversations with non-vegans when they're talking about animal rights, and just help them identify the logical fallacies that people use and how to reply and how to communicate, basically, because that is what it is. There's not a single justified way, logically speaking, of what we're doing to other animals.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for highlighting, the course of your activism career in a way, and you mentioned the role of both street activism and also you're discovering that reaching directly the source of where the next generational thought is going to be shaped and coming
Mm.
from. And so your decision to sort of go and have a conversation directly with students, and obviously the pandemic has played a role, has forced a lot of us to pivot and
Mm.
look towards other avenues. um, so you mentioned that you did this survey, and
Yeah.
it helped you understand the impact of your words and in your work. Tell us a little bit about that. What
Yeah.
compelled you to do it? What was that idea that you didn't have before
Okay.
that you then did? And
Well,
yeah.
yeah, I was wondering, like, if I'm gonna do this, I want to know how effective it is, because it's I was gonna spend a lot of time, 45 lectures. It's quite tiring, and and I did it in, I think, 40 days. And so there were several days where I would have 2 or 3 lectures, and before starting this, I was like, is it even worth it? Will this work? What if they're not interested? What if it just doesn't speak to them? So I prepared a survey, anonymous survey. The same survey was sent to every single student, regardless of which country or university I was in or school. And it asks very basic questions to begin with. How do you identify, vegan, vegetarian, flexitarian, omnivore, carnivore, whatever? What do you currently think about it? And then how do you feel after the lecture? Or what action do you think you will take after the lecture? And then just a general notes section if anybody wants to leave a message. And more than 60% of the students who from all the lectures voted that they want to get active for the animals and the environment, which is a ridiculous number if you think about, like, if I talk to probably, I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000, maybe 3,000 students, that's more than 1,500 deciding to be active in a way or another for the animals and the environment. And that was one way. Another way was, how will you now change your consumer habits? Like, will you start eating less animal products, or will you go vegan, or do you want to learn more about veganism before going vegan? And the numbers, I don't know them by heart, but they were so good, and that's what kept me going, because obviously I also realized that it was, honestly speaking, very stupid to think that I can do 45 lectures in 40 days and stay sane. It was very tiring, because it was not in one country, it was all over Europe. So, and I did almost all of them by train, so it was like a lot of train rides. And then, sometimes I'd finish a lecture in one school and the other school would send a car to pick me up to go there, because we didn't even have time. And I asked a friend to join me at that time. I remember we had moments where we were on the metro eating chickpeas out of a can because we didn't have time to grab lunch. So what helped me a lot, actually, the thing that kept on pushing me was just reading the answers from these surveys. Every single time I did a lecture the day after, or 2 days after, if I'm tired or something, I would open it again and start reading the the survey answers, and it would just push me, because so many people kept on saying, that's it, I'm gonna go vegan, Laura. I can't believe I didn't know this. Like, I used to think that it's okay, but now I don't, or I want to be active, and all these amazing feedback. It's really important, if we're going to be active and spend our time and resources on something, might as well check if we're being effective, because if we're not, then we're not doing the animals any favor.
Right. Well, that's absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. At Divinity, at our nonprofit, the Versa Foundation, we do a lot of behavioral research, and
Mm-hmm.
for exactly the several reasons that you mentioned, that it's really important to understand the pulse of the audiences that we're talking to. It's important to understand what is it that they feel. Are they even interested in changing their hearts, their minds,
Mm.
their, are they willing to deploy their voices in favor of those who don't have a voice?
Yeah.
Oftentimes, especially in the animal-centric economy, and the food systems that we're unfortunately surrounded with. Um, so you mentioned that you were on this really exhausting, but at the same time energizing tour of doing these 40 to 45 lectures and speaking engagements, with young minds that you had
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to. And you mentioned how when you were tired and you were low on energy, you took a lot of energy from, and you sort of got your true north again
Mm-hmm.
reset every time you heard what these students had to say. In your experience in doing activism for adults and for young people, you know, tell me, how different is it, and have
Yeah.
you had to change your way in which you talk to these young impressionable minds?
Well, honestly speaking, I'm able to be more straightforward with younger people than older people because older people tend to take things very personally and they shut down immediately and try to argue back. Whereas younger people are always open to learn more. They're like sponges, they just want to take as much information as they can. And at the same time, we have to keep in mind that they have not lived long enough to have more years of conditioning that older people already do. And so to change the idea or way of thinking, their way of thinking towards other animals is much easier in my experience than doing that with someone who's lived like 40 years more than them. Because that means 40 years more of conditioning, 40 years more of brainwashing and propaganda, 40 years more of habits that they would have to change. Facing 16 years, 17 years, 20 years, that's so much easier. So I've definitely seen more success speaking with younger people about veganism and animal rights than older people.
Yes, you mentioned the conditioning that a lot of us have gone through and how adults tend to take things very personally. We make it
Mhm.
about us.
Yes.
And I guess that conditioning, eh, then therefore logically, and you deal a lot with logic, right?
Hmm.
Conditioning then sort of perhaps makes us more selfish
Hmm.
and self-centric,
Yes.
and it sort of forces us that anything and everything is at our disposal, for our disposal, and about us and for us. And in doing that, we sort of create that power distance between
Hmm.
the I and what is or who is in front of me. And sometimes we don't even, lines blur between what and who, which is why
Yeah.
we look at a beautiful, intelligent, sentient pig, for example, and then we think of them as bacon and ham.
Yes.
And that even reflects in our vocabulary, and we are going to
Hmm.
talk about that, because I know that you're very passionate about deconstruction of that logic, and you've written about it. You've already mentioned your amazing book. But I wanted to sort of touch upon the role of identity.
Hmm.
And so you're a multicultural person. Your belief is in multiculturalism. What role does identity play in your activism?
Um, that's a really good question. Actually, I grew up in Lebanon, of course, but I'm also originally Armenian. I'm third generation Armenian in Lebanon after the Armenian genocide. So my great grandmother survived the genocide and settled down there. So I'm third generation after that. So I went to an Armenian school, I think in Armenian. So even being in Lebanon was sometimes like I had this identity crisis growing up. Like, what do I identify more with, Lebanese or Armenian? But the thing is, it doesn't matter because in some things I identify more as Lebanese. In other things, I identify more as Armenian. In others, as neither. But one thing I do know is that both cultures really enjoyed and took part in meat culture. And this is something that exists in every single culture. Everyone says, "Oh, in my culture, we really, eat meat and enjoy it." But it's like, yeah, but almost every single culture does that. And one thing we have to keep in mind is that culture, we can't derive our morality and ethical decisions just from culture. It's just not the right way to do that because then you can basically justify anything based on culture. And that's a very dangerous road to take when it comes to morality and ethics. So I think my identity definitely changed a bit because I realized I should stop relying on these things and wondering that if that's where I should derive my morality from. But it doesn't mean that I just like got rid of it altogether. So that's really important to keep in mind that that's still a part of me, but I can decide what from that identity is good for me and for others and what isn't. For example, at one point in my life, I went hunting a few times. So if I went hunting and I enjoyed that at the time, and that was part of my identity for a while, there's nothing that says I can't change that. That's actually the beauty of being human. Like you can change so many things about your identity, your beliefs. Like you know, you can be religious and then change and stop being religious and then be religious again and then be spiritual and then believe in something else. You know, that's completely fine. But the most important thing is that you make sure that what you're doing is not harming others, and to never ever use your identity or culture or background as a justification to hurt others. So that should just not be acceptable in any kind of identity or background. I think that's really important. And I also want to say, you know, as vegans, we're also still not perfect. I do personally see a lot of people who identify with veganism so strongly that they're not able to have communications with others that are supposed to help other animals. So they make their whole personality about veganism, which inherently speaking doesn't sound so bad, right? Because
Yeah.
then you think, what's better than being so passionate about it? Yeah, but there's a fine line between being passionate and being ineffective because of how passionate you are. And although I think it's great that you want to make it all about veganism, but it's still more important when it comes to how you're helping other animals, because that's what it's about at the end of the day. You know, we're trying to help other animals as much as we can. So we should create this flexibility in our identity to be open for change. You know, I myself, even within veganism, I've changed my mind on so many topics so many times. And in so many videos I've made on YouTube, if I'm sharing an opinion that I feel is kind of strong, I say straight away and honestly, I say, this is my opinion now. I might change. And you know what? Maybe someone can prove me wrong. If you think I'm wrong, just let me know. And I
Yes.
think some people even don't like that because they don't want to, they want to have that war, you know, like, no, you're wrong, I'm right. Like, how about you show me why I'm wrong? And you know, there's this idea that being wrong is bad. I think staying in the wrong is bad. Being wrong is amazing because then you realize you were wrong and you do the right thing. And so you grow as a person. I think that's one of the best things you can do. So, yeah, I think in general, identity is important, but what's more important is how we're using identity and cultural upbringing and background when it comes to what's happening to other animals, to other humans as well, and the planet.
Well, that was beautiful, Seb. You know, and as you were talking, I'm kind of soaking it all in, as I'm sure our viewers are as well. And you've touched upon just so many different things. So you've spoken about the difference between our inheritance and inherited beliefs. Um, from identity, and a lot of people just believe there's 100% overlap, and
Hmm.
and it's almost like they feel chained and sort of pinned to a certain stereotype. You know, and I'm of South Asian origin, and you know, there's not a big meat culture, but it's a big dairy culture,
Yeah.
which we know dairy is meat, is leather, is
Hmm.
cruelty, is brutality, is destruction of the divine feminine, you know. And but it's very easy for a lot of people, and I guess it's lazy for a lot of people to say, well, this is my culture and therefore I'm going to stick to it,
Yeah.
and not understand that difference. um, and you very beautiful spoke about the power of choice, which
Hmm.
again goes back to this age old debate of free will versus determinism. Am I going to be
Yeah.
determined by where I was born, who I was born to, what I was born of and into, and so on. And then you mentioned about activists, you know, how militant some of them will get, and they want to spar, and they want to war with people. And I guess that's really around attachment versus commitment. If you're
Hmm.
committed to an idea, or if you're committed to an ideal, you'll be more than happy to embrace any discomfort that comes
Yes.
with that, because in it lies your evolution and your growth. um,
Hmm.
this is beautiful. So I'm
Yes.
really really enjoying this conversation, and I'm going to quote from one of your previous interviews, Seb. You said, I now do for animals what I wanted someone to do for me, what I expected someone would do for me during that period of my life. And you were referring to your upbringing and your childhood in Lebanon. Can you share a little bit about this?
Yeah, I remember saying that. I don't remember which podcast. It was on. Do you have it written down?
I do not have it written down, unfortunately, but Priyanka, who helps me with social media and communications at our nonprofit, she is a brilliant researcher,
All
and
right.
she pulled this out. So,
Okay. Yeah, we can talk about that. So, yeah, I grew up in Lebanon. I was born in 1989, which was around the end of the civil war. That was 15 years. So I was born in 89. The war started in 75 and ended in 1990. My mom said the day after I was born, the war stopped, and they made all these jokes that I'm born and the war stopped. But then 2 days later, it started again. Turns out it had stopped because someone important had arrived. But growing up, in Lebanon is just it's such a, unfortunately, in the middle of an area that is seen as a battleground, not only for the countries who are there, but also for other countries. I think it's like, when you go to a football field and you rent it to play there, countries do that with the Middle East. Like they choose their battlefields in the Middle East because then they don't have to do it in their own countries. And with my upbringing, there was one war that was in the south of Lebanon. That was not the same as the civil war. I think that was around the end of the 90s or mid 90s. I don't remember that much from it, but I do remember seeing on TV what was happening. It was around maybe 2 hours from my place. So obviously at that age, it kind of affects, even though I don't remember being affected by it, but I'm sure it had affected me somehow, because I also remember that when I was very young and my mom used to drop me off at school, I would cry every day because I was afraid that while I'm away, they're gonna die, something bad's gonna happen to them. So obviously, I have some kind of trauma from it. Another thing that happened was the war in 2006. It was a 33-day war. And regardless of what anyone thinks of politics or what war is justified and unjustified or who started it, when you see civilians being massacred day after day after day, and civilians your age and younger, and your family, like your brother's age, your sister's age, and you see the images on TV, and you realize that not a single country cares about what's going on, it's horrible. It's horrible because then you're like, oh, does anybody really care? Like, how would you have reacted if this was somewhere else? We can see now with what's happening in Ukraine. I've been very silent about this on social media, but it boils my blood because I'm like, wow, now everybody really cares about war, because the victims are European and they're not even being secretive about it. Politicians are literally saying, these are not uncivilized refugees. These have blonde hair and blue eyes, like, and to hear those words and to hear the reaction of people, and it's not that I don't want any victim of war to not get support. I'm all for it, but let's not discriminate who we're going to support and who we're going to ignore. And that's what I went through growing up. I realized that nobody really cared about Lebanon and what's going on there. The only thing they cared about is political influence, political presence, sending money to fund local parties to have their agendas. And it was just really hurtful because that's when you think, well, what about, because at that age, I really looked up to peaceful organizations, and the United Nations was one of them. And then you hear the the head of United Nations saying, I'm not going to quote, I don't want to get too much into politics, but completely ignoring massacres of civilians. And then you think, wow, and this organization is supposed to keep peace, and send their armies like the UNIFIL and things like that. But then you realize it's nothing. It's just talk. So that's what bothered me a lot growing up. And then I realized, I had a cat that I loved so much, and I made myself sound like an animal lover, but it was just talk. It was just talk. I was still killing those animals. I was still eating animals. And my friend, thank God she did that. She called me out on it. She told me, "You're a hypocrite. You're not an animal lover. You're a hypocrite. You're a speciesist. You're harming other animals, and you're saying you love them while you're killing them." And it was very heavy to hear that, but I needed to hear that. And I'm so thankful that she said it. I'm so thankful that she was honest about it, that she called me a hypocrite, because it's fine. It's fine if someone calls you a hypocrite. Instead of getting offended, check if what they say makes sense. Check what made them say that, especially if it's someone who cares about you. So that's something that pushed me a lot to wanna fight for other animals. That, along my upbringing as an Armenian, because the Armenian genocide to this day is completely ignored and unrecognized.
Yes.
It actually is not recognized by the majority of the world, because it happens to be that Turkey, and who was the country that did the genocide, just has very important influential power in the area and natural resources. So even when I think the United States wanted to recognize the genocide, Turkey said, you do that and forget your army bases here, so then suddenly they don't recognize. So it's the mix of these two things, of realizing nobody cares about you, that made me want to be outspoken about these causes. And I think that's what made me become an activist as well, because in some way I realized, wow, I and I can't even get close to comparing what these animals go through. I mean, we shouldn't compare, of course, but if you wanted to compare, what these animals go through, it's not even close to what I went through. It's so much worse. And I'm not saying that to ignore any kind of other troubles that people are having. I'm saying it so that we realize the scale of what's going on and how we're just ignoring it. And I wasn't comfortable with that. I realized, like, okay, if I wanted others to do that for me when I was growing up, then I need to be that for others as well.
Right. Well, as as you've mentioned, um, indifference hurts more.
Hmm. Yeah.
One is you get some sort of a stroke from your environment, and recognition of the fact that something happened, the fact that it wasn't right, the fact that it caused so much hurt and disappointment and loss is that's that just that is, sometimes it calms and soothes
Yeah.
soul. But the blatant indifference with
Hmm.
which things are happening, and you mentioned about the Armenian genocide. For my own culture, I come from the northwestern part, and a lot of people say that the Middle East sort of starts where I come from. I'm a Punjabi, and after the Second World War, the largest human transmigration that happened because of the partition of my state,
Mm.
into carving part of what is modern day Pakistan. And
Yeah.
so my home state was actually split right through the middle by a cartographer who had never once stepped foot into South Asia. So there are stories of villages where people found their master bedroom and a bathroom in Pakistan when they woke up. And and then the Radcliffe
Oh
line
my
is what it's
God.
called. The rest of their courtyard and the rest of their house was left in India. And it led to close to 14 million people needed to be displaced,
Oh my
and
God.
around half of them massacred because of the communal rioting that was seeded, in the partition of Punjab and the partition of India. But as you mentioned, this is speciesism in and of itself. It's like we
Yeah.
do this to our fellow human beings, and
Hmm.
by creating that distance, we are not even able to recognize the sentience of a non-human being. um, and that is called speciesism. Why does speciesism exist, Seb? What are your thoughts on that?
Um, so I've done some research into understanding when and how it became as bad as it is now. What was the main push, let's say? And unfortunately, I haven't found anything that's. I found theories, let's say, theories that may be true, may be wrong. But it seems that a lot of cultures were living very peacefully until civilization, and as a result, domestication of some animals, resulted in some cultures realizing attacking others and taking their animals, and as a result, more space and more land for the animals can make them richer. And it seems that is also, if I'm not mistaken, the word capitalist, capita, I think, is the Latin word. If I'm not mistaken, this was a long time ago that I read the book. It was a Latin word for the head of an animal. So
Pedestal.
it was the idea that you know, if you exploit another, that is capitalism. And the birth was from exploiting other animals. It was the moment they realized, wow, we can keep these animals and make them work for us for free, you know, and then we use their bodies or their secretions for consumption or for sale. And so it seems like, for me, that sounds like a very, very simple theory that explains how this all started. And it's very messed up, because that's how it started blowing up, and more cultures start doing that. And it is written that many cultures that started doing that started getting more violent immediately. And this idea of trying to discriminate someone based on their appearance or belonging to a group can very simply be extended to other types of discrimination based on appearance or belonging to a group. It's really disturbing that no one thinks about this, that this is the first type of discrimination we are taught from when we were born, play with the dog, eat the chicken, or even eat the dog and play with the chicken, or whatever it is. This arbitrary decision to protect some and kill others, or kill anyone who doesn't look like you, is just really dangerous. And I think the reason why it still exists is because people are profiting so much from it. And with that profit, they are pushing more and more propaganda, more and more false education, more and more brainwashing. And so it's very difficult to make as many people as possible see the reality, because the resources of the industry are so much that they're always ahead of us for now. For now, that's the case, but it doesn't mean it's going to be like this forever. It doesn't mean it has to be like this forever.
Right. And and you're, yeah, it's I got goosebumps as you were talking about, and how simply you sought to explain um, that speciesism at its very root is when we as our own species started practicing in groupism, out groupism, and that our
Hmm.
in group somehow had the right to have privilege, and how that privilege and captaincy really came from the
Yeah.
word, capital, and how that literally, you're right, it refers to heads of cattle, you know.
Yeah.
So if you have, you're better off than somebody else, if you have more heads of cattle in your pen, and in your farm, as compared to somebody else, and then it becomes me versus you, mine versus yours, and that's when we start to think of others as disposable.
Yes. Disposable and as resources. I mean, think about the word livestock. It's it's stock that is alive. That's what we used to refer to them. Like, I cannot even imagine a more disturbing way to refer to another being. Like, that is an alive stock. Like, showing that it's alive and claiming that it's a stock, both at the same time, an object of consumption, an object of commerce. It's really disturbing that we've gotten to that level.
Right. And it is vocabulary, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
it's the bane and the boon of our species is our ability and disability, um, of being able to communicate, you know. And you've curated a podcast which is called Principles of Change. How do you want your podcast to be a vehicle to talk more and
Hmm.
to really sort of plant these seeds of cognitive dissonance?
Yeah, I mean, I've received a lot of messages, sometimes replies to stories or posts that I've shared, of people saying something like, I wish I could do what you're doing. And I always thought, why? Why do you wish you could do what I'm doing? Because I'm sure you can do something that doesn't necessarily have to be what I'm doing. And I think that comes from a place of thinking that there's only a few or one good way of being an activist. And I know myself that that's not true, because I used to think that street activism was the best until I did lectures. And now I think that's best for me. But then I see the work of others that I get on the podcast, and I'm like, wow, that's even better. But it doesn't mean that I should do that, because they're doing it because they have something in them that I don't. I mean, we're all different. We're all built differently. We all have different talents, backgrounds, professions. You know, a politician can do so much more than I could ever do in 1,000 lectures. And I'm so happy for that, but I'm not a politician. And maybe a politician cannot do lectures. And both are fine. Both cases are fine. As long as we respect each other, as long as we support each other, as long as we push each other's work forward, um, I think that's the most important thing. And so I started the podcast in the hopes of normalizing as many types of activism as possible. So I've had politicians, I've had Damien Mander, for example, who has started the Anti-Poaching Foundation.
Yeah.
I've had the founder of A Billion, the application that's based in Singapore. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's an amazing application. Do you know A Billion? You do.
Yes, yes, Vikas.
So
I think he's
because yes, I've had him on the podcast as well, because that's another thing. You know, he doesn't go down on the street and do activism. He just made an amazing application that donates millions to sanctuaries at the touch of a button. It's really great. So I've had him on the podcast. I've had uh, vegan influencers, you know, something that someone who doesn't necessarily do activism in that way, but they use their social media influence to raise awareness about veganism. And one important thing to keep in mind is, just because I have someone on a podcast doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with every single view or that they hold or action that they take. I just want to make sure that people are aware that there are different ways of raising awareness. I may not be comfortable doing one of those things myself, but that's fine. I don't have to. No one is making me do that, and I shouldn't think that I should do that just because I had someone as a guest who also does that. I've had also the founder of Veganuary, Matthew Glover. I wanted to talk about that with him and see what his idea was. You know, why for a month and what happens in that month. You know, if it's an ethical stance, because I know a lot of people think that Veganuary cannot be vegan because veganism should not be for a month. But then I learned that it's actually a way of introducing, and they do end the month by raising the ethical question, you know, making the users more aware of what's happening to other animals. So different people fight for this in different ways. And I just wanted to help my listeners and viewers to see that that is possible. You know, it's not one size fit all. There are so many people out there doing so many amazing things, and it just inspires me so much. Every single time I talk to someone who was a guest, I'm like, wow, I wish I could do what they're doing. But then I remember that's the whole point. I can't do what everyone else is doing. I can only do what I can offer to this movement, just as all these people can do what they can do for the movement. So that's what pushed me to do it, and that's why I called it Principles of Change. Because at the end of every single podcast, I ask the guests, what are your core principles that push you to fight for change? And it's really amazing because every single one of them, no matter what they say, it's all connected. So it just shows that no matter how active and like how different the ways we are active are, our core principles are the same, and that is for justice, for compassion, for the other animals.
right. And once people connect the dots, they're actually able to bring their own brand of activism and their
Yeah.
own signature to the
Mhm.
movement. Because a pledge won't be a pledge if there's just one signature, if there's just one face. We need
Yeah.
so many different, ways, and a variety of different voices to come forth.
Mhm.
Um, you've mentioned about your podcast. You've spoken about the different types of influencers and different models of change that you've been able to sort of bring to your viewers. You were an architect. So now you're an architect, obviously, of the plant-based movement. You're also bringing that architectural flair. Um, Tell us about the architect in you, and how you're is first of all, is he still there? And
Uh,
the traditional sense of the word, and if not, then how are you continuing to be an architect, is what my question is.
yeah. I do miss it sometimes. Recently, I have two friends who are building their house, and I told them, I'm here to help you out if you have any questions. Obviously, I cannot sign projects and build projects by myself because I'm not in the country where I am recognized as an architect. That's a long process. I also don't have the time for it. But it's been really fun to do that, just drawing again and coming up with concepts and the creativity. I would definitely say even without that, it's still there because I I guess it's something that I spent 6 or 7 years of my life on, and it really creates a way of thinking about plans, let's say. And as an architect, you have to be both creative and reasonable at the same time. So you have to be creative to come up with the ideas, but you also have to be reasonable and realistic to not come up with stupid ideas that will make the building fall. So I think, especially when I was doing my work on the ebook, and reading so much about logic and the philosophy, I really found so many things that I align with, because I find myself so many times being over logical and less emotional, because I want to just categorize everything, because that's how I'm used to work as well. Everything has to be category and everything has to make sense and be logical. And that's a huge part of me as well. And architecture plays a part because you have to implement that to every single thing you're doing in architecture. I remember a teacher of mine once told me, every single time you make a design, you have to find at least two ways to justify why that's a good design. So if you put a window somewhere and you say this is good because light comes in, that's not enough. You need another reason. So you always have to find two reasons to justify your next step. And that's something that is so important, in everything in life that you're doing. I mean, you don't always have to have two reasons, but it's something that's good because it makes you, if you didn't find a second reason while you're thinking of that, you can come up with a new idea that has two reasons, and two reasons is always better than one. So there's that. I also had another architect. I cannot forget this man. He was so uh, charismatic. He was an Indian architect, and he was our teacher. And the first day, he made us stand in front of the wall, one by one, literally in front of the wall with our eyes closed. And he made other students, like one student, approach us from the back very carefully without making any noise. And he asked the person standing in front of the wall to raise their hand when they realize the person is very close to them. And his idea was that even though you don't see, you feel the energy of the person around you once they get really close to you. So just keep in mind how close you're letting other people get to you in your house. Like, what about your bedroom? Should it be right behind the wall of a living room where maybe someone is sitting? Or what about the bathroom? And all these like theories that he had. And I even remember one day he made us do an exercise. And before we start the exercise, he said, "How many breaths do you each take every minute?" And no one knew how to answer. And he was like, "How do you not know how many times you breathe a minute? This is like the most important thing you do." And it was so interesting to have someone raise such logical and important questions. I mean, it's not like someone's gonna pull a gun on your face and say, "Answer now, how many times do you breathe a minute?" But it's important because, I mean, now I find myself doing sports much more than my whole life, actually. And I realize the importance of breath and how much it helps you, mentally and emotionally and physically. And I have a watch that tells me my resting, breathing rate, or my sleeping breathing rate, and it's all things that matter. And having an architect as a teacher who explains all these things to you that don't seem to be in any way related to architecture is really amazing, because then you realize it's not just about building walls and making a house. It's so much more than that. This is where you're going to live, and this is, the way the area you live in will affect every single thing about your life. There's no way it cannot affect you. So it's really important to take that into consideration. But yeah, most importantly, planning things and getting things done in architecture has definitely shaped my way of thinking, both emotionally, creatively, and logically and reasonably at the same time.
What a gift, Seb, to have a teacher who not only teaches you about architecture, but also literally how to how to sort of think, and that
Hmm.
critical thinking, and
Yes.
and inciting you to answer or think of and wonder about those questions, because I think it's that childlike wonder that seems to diminish as
Hmm.
years go by, and we forget to ask some of these questions. And you've spoken about sensory perception, how the
Yeah.
energetic field kind of works, and you're I know somebody's behind me. I know if someone's looking at me, even if I
Yes.
don't sort of look at them, but I can feel it, right? And this is the beauty of being human. This is the beauty of being sentient, and with that comes choice,
Hmm.
which you've spoken about, right? We have 10 more minutes, and I feel that we can continue to talk about just so many different things. um Clearly, you've mentioned this one professor who you had in architecture school, who's influenced you so much. Who are other activists or non-activists, perhaps, people who you may have met or not met, because physically, in the physical form, they're no more on planet Earth? Who are these
Mm.
people that inspire you?
Yeah. My father, um, he passed away yeah, last year in February, and he was an activist growing up for the recognition of the Armenian genocide as well. But he was also a very um, strong man, but very emotional at the same time. Which, so like he's like not in a negative way, but he was manly, let's say, but not manly in a toxic way. More like taking care, protection, and at the same time very much emotional about what's happening to others and how he can help them. We weren't aware of how many people he had helped until he passed away, and we started reading all these Facebook posts about all the good things he had done that he never spoke about. um, and obviously his younger years as an activist and how many people looked up to him. And even during the civil war in Lebanon, so many people mentioned in Facebook posts that where they wrote about him, they talked about how important he was to the community and how many lives he saved, of people from all communities. Because the civil war, every single community is killing the next one, but he just saved people from all, like any community he came across, he tried to save when he knew there's a certain party coming to a place to massacre people. He would take action straight away and evacuate people and things like that, or providing food, providing protection, and all these things. So yeah, he's the person who has influenced me the most, that's for sure. And he was very happy when I was an architect, and he was very proud of it. But he was even prouder when I became an activist, which means a lot coming from a father who spent so much. I mean, I don't know how it is with you over there, but in Lebanon, parents pay the tuition fees of their children. I know it's not like that in most of the Western world, but he paid a lot of money to make sure that I get the education that I have. And he became prouder when I quit that and became an activist. He was, and that speaks for how important of, like, how much importance he saw in activism himself. So yeah, there's him. There's Tom Regan, whose book The Case for Animal Rights is an absolute amazing book for animal rights. It's not an easy book, I'm not gonna lie. It's really difficult. It's because it's really deep philosophy, but it's really really powerful. If anybody's listening to this and they're really good in English, and I really mean really good, because I even struggle sometimes, I really recommend you read it, The Case for Animal Rights. And I mean, there are so many people who inspire me, and the thing is, everyone inspires me in a different way. I may see someone who, sometimes people think that inspiration comes from famous people, And yeah, it can because you know of them, but inspiration can come from your neighbor as well. Like it doesn't have to be someone with a big following or a social media presence or whatever. It can be someone with like 50 followers or whatever. As long as they're doing something that I find inspiring, then I will use that inspiration to fuel for my activism.
Right. Inspiration can come from anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
We can source ideas and creativity and understanding of, how to move about our mission and our calling in the world, and it can be sourced from anywhere. We just have to be open
Mm-hmm.
and um, and open to being wrong, as you said at the beginning
Yes.
of our conversation, and not get too attached to
Mm-hmm.
ourselves and things that we own and our ideas, because if we do, then we're not committed to them anymore, and in the end we're not committed to ourselves anymore. um, you mentioned about your father and
Mm-hmm.
the impact he had on the world and indeed on you, and how a lot of times we end up understanding the impact that somebody brought to the world since after they've passed.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I'm very sorry for your loss, Seb.
Thank you.
And I lost my father to the pandemic, and he passed in August of 2020. And he was an anthropologist, and he was an author. He was a poet. My mother has since come out with a lot of stories of when he was younger and when they were younger, and I wasn't around yet. And obviously social media these days is it's amazing, literally, in capturing stories of your own, of our own loved ones, stories and anecdotes that we weren't aware of, and that just enables their memory to live on, and for us to find a piece of them in our work and in ourselves. um, well, one of the questions that I had for you is, how do we make this paradigm shift possible? Do you believe
Mm.
that it can happen in our lifetime?
So, a lot of my friends call me negative and pessimistic for having the following view, but I refer to it as realistic. Um, I don't believe we will see it in our lifetime. And I hope I'm wrong. I really, really, really hope my friends are right and I'm wrong, because that's the best situation that can come out of this. Um, I feel like this is going to be a long battle. And I have a feeling that it's going to get to a point of I told you so, where vegans and environmental activists are going to tell the world, look what you've done. We've been telling you for decades you're destroying the environment, resource wars and climate change. It's people worry about refugees now. Wait till it gets worse. It's gonna be much much worse than what you have now, and what you have now wasn't even a crisis or whatever, because everyone can take in refugees when they're willing to, of course. And I think it's gonna be a long way, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope something happens. Sometimes some of these big companies make statements, and I'm like, wow, it really sounds like this might be the future. When Burger King makes a fully vegan restaurant, even for a month, I'm not a fan of Burger King. I won't go there. I don't need to. Other people go there anyway. I'd rather support vegan businesses. But when they do something like that, it makes me wonder, okay, if they do this and then the next one did that, and then you have Unilever saying that they want to make this much percentage of their profit from plant-based products, it really seems like there's, obviously for the wrong reasons, obviously because it's all money oriented, but it seems like there's a shift. And if they're doing that, it's because, yes, they want to do it for the money, but that's because people are changing. Otherwise there would be no money in it. So there's a little hope um, that it might be sooner than expected. And that's why I say I hope I'm wrong. I may be wrong. But in general, I do feel it's going to be a long battle. maybe I would expect in 2 generations, if the world is still habitable by then. If not, I told you so.
Well, we really, really hope that, um, somebody's right, and hopefully that we are able to see, if not the change itself, but these seeds and sprouts of
Hmm.
change. Um, and I completely understand both these little sparks of optimism, but at the same time, the general pessimism. And for me personally, it sort of might even differ from day to day, depending on what I hear, what I
Hmm.
see. And you've mentioned these large corporations, these large brands that have so much influence, much like the politicians. And if they're able to make these changes one step at a time, one restaurant at a time, one product at a time, I feel good about that. But at the same time, I don't know the planetary clock. I
Hmm.
don't know how far out are we. Are we already to a point of no return? Well, Seb, we're at the hour. I could talk to you for so much more, much longer. You're an architect who is breaking down walls one at a time. You're an activist, who's exploring, investigating principles of change. Um, you're a warrior who's helping us fight the military industrial animal complex. Um, I thank you on behalf of our viewers for everything that you do, because it's important. Otherwise, we have refugees right now, and people believe that, oh, my country is better and richer, and therefore I can hope to be a savior to a lot of them, and bring them on board. But what's going to happen when we're all planetary refugees?
Hmm.
Will there be another planet willing to take us on? And I guess we're leaving that question to Elon Musk to help answer. We're not going to resolve this on this conversation, but I wanted to thank you for your time today and for everything you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your words. Thank you.
All right. And our viewers, we will see you with another amazing warrior, another amazing climate, food, um, justice advocate, in another episode of Divinity Connecting the Dots. But that will be next month. Thank you so much for watching.